Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Have you ever had a neighbor so entitled they thought they owned your property? My neighbor tried everything to take my house for her son, until I used her own graduation party against her to end the harassment for good. I bought my first house 8 months ago, and I'm still dealing with the fallout from my neighbor who genuinely believed I should just hand it over to her kid. Some background: I'm 32 and work in software development. I'd been saving for a house since my mid-20s, but the market kept getting worse. Every time I had enough saved, prices would jump. It was demoralizing watching that goal keep moving further away. Then I got lucky. A coworker mentioned his uncle was selling his house privately. The place needed work, but it was being offered below market value because the owner wanted to avoid listing hassles. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, decent yard. Nothing fancy, but after years of apartment living, it was perfect. I closed in late February and moved in immediately. The house had good bones but needed cosmetic updates. Kitchen cabinets were original from the 90s. Bathrooms needed work. Floors needed refinishing. I planned to do most of the cosmetic stuff myself over the next year while saving up for the bigger projects. For the first few weeks, I was just getting settled. Unpacking, figuring out which outlets worked, learning the quirks of the heating system, normal new homeowner stuff. I met most of my neighbors during this time. Everyone seemed friendly enough. The guy next door was retired and loved to talk about his garden. The family across the street had young kids who were loud but not problematic. And then there was the family 2 houses down. She approached me about 3 weeks after I moved in. I was outside dealing with some landscaping when she walked over with a casserole dish. Standard welcome wagon stuff. We made small talk about the neighborhood, how long people had lived here, that sort of thing. The conversation was normal until she asked if I lived alone. I said yes, mentioned I had a girlfriend who might move in eventually, but for now it was just me. Her whole attitude shifted. She started asking about my work schedule, whether I traveled much, how I planned to use all 3 bedrooms. The questions felt intrusive, but I figured she was just being neighborly in that nosy suburban way. Then she brought up her son. He was 19 and starting at the local college in the fall. She went on about how expensive student housing was, how hard it was for young people these days, all the usual complaints. I nodded along, not seeing where this was going. Then she said her son could rent one of my spare rooms. Not asked if he could. Said he could, like it was already decided. I was caught off guard and just said I wasn't looking for a roommate. I'd just bought the place specifically to live alone after years of apartment roommates. She kept pushing. Talked about how it would help with my mortgage payment, how her son was very quiet and respectful, how it would be nice for me to have someone around. I kept declining politely. Finally, she threw out a number. $50 a month. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She seemed genuinely confused why I wouldn't jump at the chance to rent a room in my house for less than a gym membership costs. I told her no thanks and went back to my yard work. She left, but she didn't seem to accept the answer. Over the next 2 months, she came by at least a dozen times with new angles. Sometimes she'd bring her son. The kid had this attitude like he was doing me a favor by even considering living in my house. He'd walk in uninvited and comment on my furniture or ask when I was planning to upgrade things. I started keeping my doors locked even when I was home. In April, things escalated. I came home one afternoon to find her in my backyard with a tape measure. Just standing there measuring my garage. I asked what she was doing. She explained, completely casually, that she was figuring out how to add a separate entrance for her son. She'd decided the garage could be converted into a studio apartment. I told her to get off my property. She acted offended, said she was just trying to help me maximize my investment. I repeated that she needed to leave and that her son would never be living in my house. She finally left, but told me I was being short-sighted and that I'd regret not being more community-minded. The next week, I got my first HOA violation notice. Someone had complained about construction debris in my yard. There was no construction debris. I'd had a few Amazon boxes by my recycling bin waiting for trash day, but that was it. I ignored it, figuring it was a mistake. Then I got another notice about noise violations, then one about my lawn maintenance. None of the complaints were valid, but they kept coming. I attended the next HOA meeting in May to address this. Brought photos showing my property was fine. The board seemed annoyed that their time was being wasted with bogus complaints. One member even commented that my house looked better than it had in years. But the complaints kept coming from the same address, my neighbor 2 doors down. In early June, things got weirder. I started noticing the son hanging around my property, not doing anything specific, just sort of loitering nearby once I caught him trying my back gate. Another time he was peering in my garage window. I put up security cameras, nothing fancy, just a basic wireless system from the hardware store. The footage was enlightening. Over the next couple of weeks, I caught the son knocking over my trash cans twice, caught the mom leaving notes on my car windshield about being a bad neighbor. Caught them both standing in my driveway having conversations while staring at my house. I compiled the footage and took it to the local police station to document the harassment. The officer who took my report recognized their address immediately. Apparently, they'd been involved in boundary disputes with previous neighbors too. Armed with the police report, I went back to the HOA with everything documented. The board sent them a warning letter about harassment being a violation of community rules. This was mid-June. A week after they got the HOA warning, she knocked on my door. Different approach this time. She was apologetic, said they'd just been so worried about housing for their son that they'd gotten carried away. Classic non-apology. Then came the new offer. They wanted to buy my house. She offered me exactly what I'd paid for it back in February. Nothing for the improvements I'd made. Nothing for the market increase, just cost. I said no. She pushed harder, implied it would be better for everyone if I just sold and moved somewhere I'd fit in better. I closed the door. 2 days later, I got a letter from them. An actual typed letter signed by both parents claiming that the previous owner had made a verbal agreement to rent a room to their son and that I was legally obligated to honor this arrangement. It was complete nonsense. I knew the previous owner through my coworker. He'd lived alone for 15 years after his wife died. He didn't rent rooms. This was pure fabrication. I consulted a real estate attorney just to cover my bases. He confirmed it was garbage and suggested I send a cease and desist letter. I did. Certified mail. That should have been the end of it. Instead, she showed up at my door on a Saturday morning in late June with her final demand. She said since I refused to rent to her son and refused to sell the house, the least I could do was give it to him. Not sell it. Give it. Her logic was that she and her husband had been in the neighborhood for 12 years. They'd raised their son here. They'd contributed to the community. I'd been here 4 months. Therefore, her son had more right to the house than I did. I was so stunned I didn't even respond. She continued, saying that if I really cared about doing the right thing, I'd sign the house over to her son for his college graduation present. She'd even brought paperwork. Actual quit-claim deed forms she'd printed off the internet. I told her to leave. She planted herself on my porch and said she wasn't leaving until I at least considered it seriously. Said her son deserved this house more than I did because he'd grown up in this neighborhood. I pulled out my phone and called the police for trespassing. She left before they arrived but shouted that I'd regret not being reasonable about this. The police came, I filed a report, they said it would be documented, but there wasn't much they could do unless she came back. She came back 3 days later with a different tactic. Asked if she and her son could at least use my yard for his graduation party. Said the whole neighborhood would be invited and it would help smooth things over with everyone. I was exhausted from months of this. I just wanted it to stop. So I said fine. One afternoon, that's it. Then leave me alone. She was thrilled. Started planning immediately. The party was set for the second Saturday in July. That week, I made my own plans. The previous owner had started a privacy fence project in the backyard years ago, but only finished about a third of it before his health declined. The lumber for the rest of the fence was still stacked in my garage. I'd been meaning to finish it, but hadn't gotten around to it. Now I had motivation. I called around to fence contractors. Most were booked weeks out, but I found a guy who said he could do it the Sunday after the party if I paid a rush fee. I agreed. I also called my girlfriend and 2 friends, told them I'd need help Sunday morning and that I'd explain later. The graduation party happened on Saturday. I stayed inside most of the day, watched through my windows as they set up elaborate decorations, brought in catering, hired a DJ. The party ran from noon until almost 9 at night. My neighbor made a big show of introducing me to people, talking about how generous I was to let them use my space. A few neighbors thanked me for being accommodating after all the drama. I just smiled and nodded. Sunday morning at 7, the contractor arrived with his crew. My girlfriend and friends showed up at 8. We had the entire backyard fenced in by 3 that afternoon. The work was loud. Post-hole diggers, power saws, nail guns. You could hear it throughout the neighborhood. She came running out of her house around 7:30, still in pajamas, wanting to know what I was doing. I explained I was finishing the fence the previous owner had started. She asked why now. I said because I'd let her use the yard Saturday like she asked, and today was Sunday. My property, my timeline. Then she mentioned they'd left a bunch of party equipment in my yard overnight. Decorations, some tables, a few chairs. They'd planned to pick it up today. I told her she should have mentioned that. The fence was going up today. She needed to get her stuff now. The panic on her face was something I'll remember forever. She and her husband spent the next hour frantically hauling stuff out through the side gate. A couple decorations got damaged in the rush. The contractor had to stop work twice to let them get oversized items out. By mid-afternoon, the fence was complete. Solid 6-foot privacy fence professionally installed, completely legal and up to code. Their son's bedroom window now faced a wall of wood about 6 feet away. Their back patio had a lovely view of my fence instead of my yard. She tried to file an HOA complaint. The board told her privacy fences were allowed and that blocking views wasn't a violation. She tried to claim I'd installed it specifically to spite them. The HOA pointed out I'd simply finished a project the previous owner started and that the materials had been in my garage since before I moved in. She tried getting the city involved. An inspector came out, verified everything was up to code, and left. The fence stayed up. But something else happened that I didn't expect. Other neighbors started coming forward. Turns out this family had been pulling similar boundary-pushing nonsense with multiple people for years. The guy next to me said they'd been using part of his yard as a shortcut for 3 years despite him asking them to stop. Another neighbor said they'd let their dog run loose in his yard constantly. Someone else said the mom had tried to pressure them into hiring her husband's brother for home repairs at inflated prices. Everyone had stories. Everyone had been too polite or too worried about neighborhood drama to push back. My fence seemed to break the dam. People started filing their own complaints with the HOA about this family's various boundary violations. The complaints piled up through July and August. The family got fined for multiple violations, nothing major individually, but they added up. More importantly, their reputation in the neighborhood completely flipped. The narrative went from me being difficult to them being the problem family everyone had been tiptoeing around for years. The son ended up commuting to college from their house. Apparently 15 minutes wasn't too far after all. I finished my renovations over the summer and fall. My girlfriend moved in that October. We're getting married next spring. The fence is beautiful. I planted climbing roses along it last month, created a nice private patio area with a fire pit. We've had friends over several times and it's perfect. The entitled neighbor family avoids me now. We don't acknowledge each other when we're both outside. I'm fine with that. Other neighbors have been great though. Made genuine friends with several families once everyone knew the real story. Turns out suburban life is nice when you're not being harassed constantly. My property value increased significantly. The renovations plus the completed fence are both selling points in this area. If I ever do sell, I'll make substantial profit. I saw the mom at the grocery store a few months ago. She tried to make small talk, asked how the house was going. I kept responses brief. As I was leaving, she commented that things could have been easier if I'd just been reasonable from the start. I told her things worked out exactly how they should have. She didn't have a response. Looking back, the audacity of demanding someone give you their house is still stunning to me. Not rent a room. Not sell it at market value. Just hand over the deed because her son deserved it more. The fence was always something I planned to do eventually. They just gave me the perfect timing. They wanted to use my yard Saturday. I let them. What I did Sunday on my own property was my business. That's what happens when you spend months harassing someone and then make demands about their property. You get exactly what you asked for and nothing more. My house is my sanctuary now. The harassment stopped. The backyard is perfect, and that fence stands as a reminder that boundary pushers eventually run into actual boundaries. Sometimes the best revenge is just protecting what's yours and letting entitled people face the consequences of their own behavior. Best home improvement project I ever completed. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened a while back at a large Australian hospital. The Friday before Christmas, senior management dropped the dreaded restructure notice. It was the standard spiel about realignment, better patient outcomes, efficient practice, blah blah blah. They gave notice to the staff and unions that consultation would close in the first week of January, and the new employment structure would take effect in February. Under the conditions of our industrial award, the employer must make genuine consultation available. That means the employee must have the opportunity to change the employer's mind about making them redundant. The other important thing is that redundancy payouts are generally good in healthcare in Australia. A worker with 13 years of work history can receive a year's pay with around $113,000 tax-free, plus entitlements such as annual leave and long service leave paid out. Each year you work, your redundancy payout increases in value up to a maximum of 13 years. About 4 to 5% of staff, which was more than 200 people, were going to be made redundant. The union launched into the industrial court, arguing that the consultation time given, especially over Christmas, was insufficient. The court agreed and extended the time by 2 weeks, but it also issued 2 statements. First, the industrial court would not slow down the restructure any further. Second, it strongly reminded the unions, and there were multiple unions involved, that they could only consult. Hospital management saw this as a big win and started bragging about how they were going to beat us. The unions held a combined meeting and decided that if staff could only consult, then we would consult by asking as many questions as possible. The members were asked to submit as many questions as they could. My union alone gathered more than 1,200 questions, with around 700 of them being unique. Another 800 or 900 questions came from the other unions. As you can imagine, management did not respond well to our combined 2,000 plus questions. They attempted to push ahead anyway, so we went back to court and reminded the judge of his own order requiring consultation. The court told our employer that they had to answer the questions. The restructure was put on hold by court order. What were the questions like? Some questions were about legal ramifications related to industrial award requirements. Others were about professional legal standards. Some involved day-to-day operations, and others were about how individual staff members would be personally affected. The court ordered both sides to come back in a month, and hospital management was ordered to answer all the questions. We received our answers in 3 weeks. The answers consisted of things like yes, no, maybe, possibly, unsure. All one-word answers. That was not genuine consultation. So we headed back to court, and the judge was furious about the lack of real consultation. The hospital argued that there were too many questions to answer, but the judge reminded them that they only had to genuinely consult. By June, we were in a legal holding pattern when hospital management declared that based on feedback received, they were changing the restructure and issuing new restructure papers. The new restructure would take effect in 4 weeks. But a new restructure requires new consultation, and the hospital was not willing to do that. So back to court the unions went, again reminding the judge about the requirement for genuine consultation. We won again by doing exactly what we were told we were allowed to do. Consulting. By December, 1 year after all of this started, the hospital hired a consultant to get the restructure done. She had the same attitude as hospital management and tried to rush the restructure through without genuine consultation. So we went back to court again. By that stage, the judge had clearly had enough. He noted that the unions had played by the rules, and the hospital had not. We hit back with even more questions. The judge decided he would schedule monthly meetings with himself chairing them to work through the mess. In total, the restructure took over 3 years. Far fewer jobs were lost than originally expected. In fact, it ended up being only a fraction of the jobs they had planned to cut. In some departments, we actually gained jobs by arguing about workloads and staffing needs. The vast majority of people who did lose their jobs were close to retirement age and received handsome payouts. They also received more than 3 additional years of pay while the restructure dragged on. Some union members had not yet reached the 13 years of work history needed for the maximum redundancy payout when the restructure was first announced. The 3+ years of delay increased their payouts. All we did was consult by asking questions exactly as the judge ordered. The next one is an entitled People Story. This has been one hell of a week, and it was only Monday. I'm getting knots in my stomach just recounting the whole situation. I do not know if this belongs here, but it felt right. I am 22 and non-binary. I worked as a cashier at a very small grocery store in a small island community of fewer than 3,000 people. It was your standard minimum wage cashier job, except with more responsibilities bundled in because there were only about 10 people working there. I was not particularly enthusiastic about it because of the fluctuating schedule, the morning shifts, the weekly restocks, and dealing with people in the community who were usually old, slow, and annoying. All of that was for a paycheck worth less than a Nintendo Switch. But jobs here are basically non-existent, and I would take almost anything over waiting tables. I was finally starting to get the hang of everything. Then yesterday happened. I got dropped off at work around 6:50 a.m. by my mother. My boss came up to the car and, in front of my mother, accused me of making passes at her husband on Saturday. Her husband had been busy helping package meats in the deli area out back. Here's the thing. I had not spoken to this man before or generally acknowledged his presence. I was going back and forth from the counter, delivering stickers to put on the meat packaging because that machine is by my register. The only things on my mind at that time were doing my job and trying not to have a growing mental breakdown. I am very autistic, and I struggle to pick up on a lot of social cues. I am also incredibly awkward, so I have no idea how anyone could have decided I was being flirty, especially toward a stranger. I already have a girlfriend, and I am not interested in men. I am especially not interested in married men from my community who are older than my father. My mother and I were both confused and shocked. My mother backed me up on all of those points, but my boss did not seem particularly convinced. She kept saying things like, I had to fire someone before because of this, and I'll give her one more chance. She also kept referring to an email she had sent on Saturday where she told me the man was her husband. I had simply replied by thanking her for the clarification and thought nothing of it, so giant red flags. I knew this was going to become a crap storm. My mother told me to let her know if things got bad and said she would tell me the details about the last incident later. So I went inside. For the first several hours of my shift, my boss kept pestering me about it within earshot of customers while I tried to complete my daily tasks. She said things like, "Why did you reply to the email like that? Something is going on." Or, "You and your mother are lying about this." She asked about my age and told me to stop pretending not to be interested in guys. She even told me not to look at him, which was wild because that man would not stop staring at me on Thursday while I was trying to restock the bread shelf. I had tried not to acknowledge the weird guy because I was trying to do my job. She was being petty, passive-aggressive, and deeply unprofessional. She kept staring at me, and the whole thing was so awkward, my anxious ass was shaking in my boots. I did not understand it. I was incredibly uncomfortable. It was Monday morning and this woman was trying to drag my name through the mud because of her own insecurities, but because my mother was busy and home was about 40 miles away, I had to tough it out until my shift ended. My mother texted me constantly to check on me and make sure I was okay. She also told me that my dad said I needed to resign. Once my shift ended, the financial woman came in. I like her, and she is also my boss's niece. She pulled me aside and told me she had chastised her aunt for being unprofessional. She had seen the email and said that if I resigned, she would completely understand because the previous incident had been a hot mess. I left. On the ride home, my mother explained that a few months earlier the incident was that my boss's husband had cheated with a previous employee and someone caught them in the back near the deli. So not only was this about my boss's insecurity, but she was also willing to drag me into it to protect an unfaithful creep. My mother and I discussed what to do, and I said I was going to resign. $230 a week was not enough to deal with that kind of bullcrap, especially after my boss had shown her true colors and proven how petty she could be. I pushed it to the side for the rest of the day. My mother got me a boba, and today I sent an email officially resigning. I received 2 emails back. One was vague and arrived around noon. The other arrived about 30 minutes ago. It looked long from the notification preview, but I am not reading it right now because I am mentally too tired for this crap. The next one is an entitled parent story. To try to make a long story short, my parents live out of state. I am low contact with my mother and no contact with my father. They have been acting weird lately, constantly swinging between being completely absent and overly involved. During a recent trip back home for my great-grandmother's funeral, my father tried to get physically aggressive with my husband while I was 5 months pregnant. The tipping point? We had a conversation about nutrition in the home while I was growing up. I pointed out that everyone in our family is super morbidly obese, including me, until I learned how to eat by using a food scale and counting calories. The conversation turned vile and strange. My father kept dragging things from my childhood into the conversation, seemingly trying to turn my husband against me. Honestly, the whole day had been miserable from the moment we got into my parents' car at the airport. My parents argued over the stupidest things. Little underhanded comments, constant bickering about traffic, and fighting with the GPS system in the car. My poor husband was completely drained by the time lunch came around, and it was obvious. After the knockdown, drag-out fight my father decided to instigate, he went outside. My husband informed my mother that we would be getting our own Airbnb and that he was not going to stand by and watch his wife be denigrated and spoken down to like that. I love him for that. When my mother ran off to tell my father we were leaving, my father burst into our room and began wagging his finger in my face, trying to get me to go talk with him alone. To berate me, no doubt. I said, "No, we can just leave. We're adults." My husband calmly asked him to leave the room. My father kept pushing his weird macho ego into the worst possible place and escalated again, this time threatening physical violence. For reference, my husband is 30, a former sergeant in the 82nd Airborne, currently a working rancher and in great shape. My father is in his mid-60s, weighs around 350 pounds, and is on oxygen due to interstitial lung disease. The absolute last thing my husband wanted was confrontation. I do not even remember exactly how it ended, despite sitting right there on the bed, but my father eventually left. He convinced my mother to drive him home, which was about an hour away from where we were staying. My mother begged us not to leave and said we could still have a good weekend and attend my grandmother's memorial together. We stayed. There were a few hiccups with my mother's weird behavior because she is always lying and covering for my father. She also drinks way too much around her side of the family and treats every social gathering like a party instead of what it actually was, which was a funeral. But overall, nothing truly egregious happened after that. Fast forward to today, I am pretty low contact with my mother, and I have not spoken to my father since. Good riddance. My mother acts like we are much closer than we really are. I was expected to deliver around July 5th, 2026, but my son decided to take his sweet time. Because I am a small woman, my OBGYN and I decided it would be best to induce me on July 19th, 2026 to reduce the risk of a C-section or other complications. I had my induction scheduled at my last OB appointment on July 3rd, 2026. I told my mother that if she wanted to come to the state I live in, it would be best to do so on or around July 19th because, regardless of whether he came earlier, he would definitely be coming that day. For the last couple of days, my mother has been super involved. She has texted or called every day to ask if there have been any changes. Every time I have said, no, still planning on inducing. Finally, I confronted her and asked what she was planning for this trip. She had sent a box full of baby items that I could tell came from Dollar Tree. Rattles, stuffed animals, and similar things. Most of them were already falling apart and had to be thrown away because they were obvious choking hazards. Months ago, she told me she and her friend were going to get an Airbnb in town and that she was going to drive out. She was absolutely hell-bent on being there the day I went into labor. Today, however, it became, everything is too much money. I didn't have enough time to ask for time off, and your dad wants to drive. My thoughts came to a screeching halt. Absolutely not. Then she followed up with, don't worry, he knows you don't want to see or talk to him. I simply texted back, no thanks. I am honestly seething. I just know they are going to pull some sympathy nonsense about how he's our grandson. I already made it very clear that until my father makes a formal apology to both me and my husband, I want nothing to do with him. On top of that, the excuses about time and money being short seem off because they had plenty of time and money to go see my father's side of the family for his family reunion. That was an out-of-state trip plus 3 days of vacation expenses. It is just very clear where their priorities are. My mother is a nurse making close to 6 figures a year, so hearing excuse after excuse about how they are struggling is wild. My husband and I make a combined total of around $3,000 per month and still find ways to save and make things happen when they need to happen. My mother is also very manipulative. She is making it seem like all of this is my fault, even though I gave her all the information the moment I received it. She calls me crying every other day, talking about how much she misses me, how we're just not as close as we used to be, and how I am shutting her out of my pregnancy. I knew growing up that my parents were selfish, unstable, and immature, but seeing it this clearly hurts a lot right now, and I really do not have the energy for it. Update. I gave birth on July 21st, 2026, to a healthy, humongous boy. I ended up in hard labor for 6 hours, with 24 hours of labor total, and it ended in a shoulder dystocia delivery. My son never showed signs of fetal distress, so the care team avoided using forceps or a vacuum on him. It was very traumatic and exhausting, but neither of us suffered any injuries beyond minor bruising. No tears, nothing. That was thanks to my amazing husband and care team. Currently, I have taken a time out from seeing everyone until my body heals. As of now, we are all home, snuggled up on the couch and soaking up the moment. Anyway, thank you for watching.